Hey everyone, my name is Ben Heisch. I'm a wedding and elopement photographer based in the Pacific Northwest. And today we're talking about a super exciting camera for me. It's a camera that I've been just really excited about ever since it came out, and I'm finally able to get my hands on one, and that is the amazing Hasselblad X1DII. Now, for those of you who are subscribers of this channel, you know that I have a massive affinity for Hasselblad, and I did a review of my Hasselblad 500cm. There's just something about this company and the stuff that they make that is just so inspiring and satisfying to look at. And I think the cool thing about the Hasselblad X1D and the X1D2 is that really kind of modern but also classic design is something that, I don't know, kind of just flows through from, these old Hasselblad cameras into this next generation. I know that some people find this design to be a little bit polarizing, but to me it actually feels very modern and reminiscent of the old 500cms and that kind of classic feel. One of the things that also is kind of interesting about it too is when you look at it from the straight profile, kind of going this way, it has the same kind of box design around the front that the original one does, where you kind of have this box front and this. So it's almost like you're using a 500cm with a grip when you look at it direct on. So there's just a lot of cool styling things and whatnot that kind of go into using this camera that make it A, really unique, and B, just kind of a joy to pick up and look at. It's not something that is uninspiring like a lot of other cameras. It's something that just by looking at it, it makes me want to pick it up and use it. Now, I'll start with a quick disclaimer. This camera is not mine, although I wish it was. It is on loan to me from Hasselblad, so a huge thanks to them for sending it over for me to try out, as it's been something I've really been interested in since kind of its inception into the medium format game. So in sending it over, it definitely wasn't something that I needed to make a video about or anything like that, but I figured with a camera that is as unique as this, not doing a video about it would almost be a disservice. So it's definitely not a sponsored video. It's not, they are not paying me to say anything or even make this video. But again, it's something that I felt like was unique enough and interesting enough that would definitely be worth doing. So to start off, for those who aren't familiar with the system, it is a medium format, which is about 44 by 33 sensor, which means it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is, the same as a 645 film camera. The sensor size isn't actually the same size as a full 645. So if you're used to those focal lengths, it's not going to be identical, but it's definitely a lot bigger than a regular full frame, 35 millimeter, 36 by 24 millimeter sensor. So, there's a lot of people that are kind of waiting for that full frame, full 645 or full, 6x6, 56 by 56 ratio size sensor. And this definitely doesn't have that. It shares the same sensor as the Fuji GFX series, but there are a lot of differences between the Hasselblad system and the Fuji system, even though they share the same sensor. So in that, this is a 50 megapixel sensor, which for me, photographing with my Leicas are, in the mid 20s. So having about double the resolution with this camera and kind of shooting them side by side was a really interesting thing for me to be able to just zoom in and get all that extra resolution. I don't feel like I need 50 megapixels, especially for most of the work that I do. But I will say having the full 50 megapixels is something that, especially for some group portraits and scene setting things, was really, really helpful, and something that I'm really kind of like lusting after now, having been able to photograph with one. A lot of people that have used this camera have talked about how the autofocus is really, really slow. It's not, you know, up to the par of like the Canon EOS R, the Sony A7s, the regular Fuji X-T3s, X-T4s, X Pro 3s, that kind of thing. It's just not on that level. It doesn't have face detect. It doesn't have eye detect. From what I've kind of read, it's just like a regular contrast detect autofocus. It definitely hunts a little bit, so you'll hear it go zzz, zzz. And what I'll say is, like, if you're trying to use it, a lot of my questions were revolving around, like, can you use it at weddings? Is it a good wedding camera? So what I'll say is, if you've used medium format film at a wedding before and you're used to that pacing, this is going to feel really similar to that. You're not going to be able to just like, you know, continuously fire off a bunch of frames. You're not going to be able to have people like moving and you're going to be able to track them and stuff like that. The pace that you're going to be shooting this at is a slower pace. And if you go into it not having the expectation of a modern mirrorless camera, which I get that that is what it is, but if you have the expectation of it being basically a film camera that has a digital sensor, I don't think that you're going to go into it having a lot of disappointments. I know that for me, I just knew that the autofocus wasn't going to be as good as an EOS R or the R5, R6, and that kind of thing that I've used before. And I just kind of tried to think of it as me using a normal 645 medium format film camera, and that kind of like managed my expectations quite a bit. So the autofocus is reliable. I wouldn't say that it is fast. But the nice thing about weddings and the usage that I have and feel like this works really well for are times when my subjects aren't moving anyway. So lots of scene setting, lots of portraits. I used especially the 90mm a lot for both portraits and for some a little bit tighter stuff during ceremonies. And when the subjects aren't moving and stuff like that, like it locks on, it's totally fine. Like I said, it kind of hunts a little bit. So I'll try to pop this off and we can kind of like listen both for the autofocus motor and for, you can kind of hear how it'll be kind of popping back and forth. So as we fire this up, this will be another good kind of reminder of how long it takes. It takes about 4 seconds or so for the camera to turn on. You have to hold the button down, turn it on. So that's going to be another thing for a lot of people that is not going to be necessarily acceptable in terms of speed. I basically during weddings just didn't have it turn off. I had it go to sleep and stuff like that, but I never turned it off. So it never was too far behind me. The other thing again though, is if you're relying on it like a modern mirrorless camera, you're probably going to be disappointed. If you're relying on it in the same way that you would be relying on a film camera, it's probably not that big a deal because you're slowing down the pace, you're pulling out cameras, you're making sure that your focus is right. With a normal 645 camera, you're getting 15 to 16 photos per roll. So you're not just like firing them off at a really quick pace. And so again, like the main thing that I've just heard over and over and over about these cameras is how slow they are. And so I think my expectations were not that bad. So here is the camera kind of like firing up. It's not gonna like let me do it because I don't have a memory card, but like here is it focusing. So it goes wow, wow. It definitely has a sound. But like that time, you know, like I'm going into the distance. So it definitely doesn't sound that great. It has a very like electronic metallic-y kind of sound to it, which isn't ideal. Even if you're already on something, it will kind of move back and forth real quick to make sure that it was correct. So it's not that great. The sound is bad, and like the sound of each lens is a little bit different for the shutter because the shutter is in the lens of all these. So they have leaf shutters, which kind of maxes them out at 1/2000th of a second. But here is the sound of the 90mm. Like, honestly, it sounds like it's breaking. Especially because it's at a lower shutter speed right now. So if we kind of toss this up to like 1/125th. But it's very metallic-y. So you're definitely gonna hear the autofocus. It's not crazy loud, but it's definitely audible. And then the shutter, you don't feel a lot of vibration, you don't feel a lot of movement, which is amazing. But at the same time, it like just doesn't have that satisfying sound that, you know, even like a Leica has or anything else. It just sounds kind of bad. That being said, that's just kind of the nature of leaf shutters, right? So you can compare that sound on the 90 to this sound on the 30. You actually hear that the sounds of the shutters are significantly different. So the 30 is much more dampened. And you can like barely feel that moving in there. You can, but the nice thing about the leaf shutters is, you know, you just aren't gonna have that like mirror or even actual shutter moving inside the camera. So hand holding this thing at really slow speeds makes it pretty easy, which especially for a medium format 50 megapixel sensor, any little movement is really gonna show up. So I will say the ergonomics and use of this camera are really good. It just looks amazing, first of all. Like, it looks like a high-end product. I actually was at a wedding and I was photographing with this alongside my Leica M10s. And I'll actually grab those real quick. So obviously this is kind of like a massive flex right here. But I was photographing a couple weddings last weekend with my Leica M10s and this camera together. And having this as a setup, like, just felt so good. You can see actually that the Leica M10s are really small, but like the X1DII isn't that much bigger in the grand scheme of things. Obviously the lens is a lot bigger, but fitting this into this system, first of all, kind of even like color-wise, just transitions between the three cameras really well, where you have like, this is kind of like the middle gray, which in a photography standpoint isn't actually middle gray, but you're getting this like, you know, silver and then this darkened, it's almost like the space gray from like the iPad Pro. It just fits into that whole ecosystem and general style just so well. You know, it has a lot of classic look to it while being obviously very modern. But I had a guy come up to me at the wedding that I was photographing and he's like, man, the cameras you're using are just so unique looking. They almost look like they were like made in like a German watch factory or like in Scandinavia or something. And I was just laughing because, I mean, obviously the Leicas are made in Germany and the Hasselblad is made in Sweden. So this guy, who maybe he was a designer or something, like nailed it on the head of kind of like where these cameras look like they're from. And using these as a set, man, like, it makes me want to use them together so much, because having this around my neck and then having these two at my side with those holdfast straps was absolutely clutch. Now, I will say as well that if I was actually going to buy into this system, I think the first lens that I would definitely try to get would be the 81.9. It would fit into kind of my normal style aesthetic and everything like that a little bit better with its shallower depth of field. But that being said, as a kit, the 30 and the 90 were spot on for me being able to use in auxiliary to my other stuff. So these actually are a little bit wider and a little bit longer than my typical like 35 and 50 setup with my Leicas. And so I was able to carry around my two Leicas with a 35 and a 50, and then usually carry around this, with either the 30 or the 90, and then have one of the other lenses in a bag. And that honestly worked really, really well, having essentially like a 75-ish with the 90 and then about a 25-ish with the 30. It paired really well and kind of expanded my kit and then did the things that I wanted out of this system really well. One of the other big kind of like pros about this camera is kind of like the menu interface. I would never normally feel like that was that big a deal, especially because the Leica interface is so mellow. But if you can see here, like it's just a very Apple design kind of like feel. Everything's really easy, really straightforward. It's great. You can touch and change all the settings. It does have a scroll wheel on the front grip and one on the back. And I'll also say that the grip just is fantastic in general. One of the issues that I feel like, every camera these days should have the ability to set your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO within some wheels or menus or whatever, or without getting into menus. What I'll say is like this doesn't have, it has a dedicated ISO button, but the menu system in here is just so good and so easy that I never actually clicked it. I would just jump into the menus and click the ISO and change it really quick. Maybe it was something I would be getting into later, but I never found that really to be much of an issue. The other thing that I did was I changed the autofocus from the shutter dial to just be back button focus with this AFD button. It worked pretty well. I wish it was a little bit closer to over here. I had to reach a little bit with my thumb. Not that big a deal. And then to combine the two things there, I use that, and then you're able to click this star button in the back to zoom in to 100%, or I guess maybe whatever percent you set it at. For me, I had it at 100% to check critical focus. So, if I'm shooting wide open on one of these and then zoom all the way in, it ended up being a pretty easy system. The only thing is trying to just get used to counting these, as I would click the wrong button every once in a while when I was getting used to it. But as you kind of like progress and use it pretty often, it makes it pretty simple. Now, one of the things that I was most excited about using medium formats was kind of that shallow depth of field that you can get and that medium format look. Part of that medium format look is just like a higher bit rate, bit depth, and all that kind of stuff. Higher resolution, more dynamic range, that kind of thing definitely shows up. But the other thing is just getting that really, really shallow depth of field. And so one of the things that I was most excited about trying was some kind of Frankenstein stuff. I got this adapter to use my Leica M mount glass from Photodiox, whatever it is. So I was able to, and how ridiculous does this look? Put my Leica 50 Summilux on to the X1DII. Now you have to jump in here and put on the electronic shutter. And as long as you're super stable, you can kind of click here, do that whole zoom in thing, make sure that you are in focus and everything. And this provides you with a ridiculous look. If I was jumping to this system, I think this would be the thing that I would be most excited about. Using these lenses on here was a really, really cool thing. The look that you get out of a medium format camera shooting at 1.4, you're getting like essentially like a 40 millimeter 0.95 f1, something like that look on 645, and it looked unreal. The bummer part about that is that you're forced to use the electronic shutter, which means that you're forced to deal with the sensor readout. And the sensor readout, as I've read, is only 1/3 of a second. So it takes that long for the sensor or the processor to go all the way across the sensor and read out every single pixel, which means that you have to be super, super still. There's definitely no way to be using this while you're moving, so you can't have like clients walking towards you. You can't photograph like cars moving by or any type of action. So if you want to use like some really still life stuff, totally fine. But if your scene is moving, you're gonna get some really weird warping and stuff like that, which is a huge bummer. And one of the things that like most turns me off of being able to use this particular system. The camera is as small as it is, and you know, this size, because it utilizes leaf shutters in the lenses, which is also one of the reasons why I'm assuming the lenses are pretty darn expensive, because they have the shutter mechanism built into them, as well as just being phenomenal pieces of glass. So using the electronic shutter in here, yeah, allows the camera to be amazing, feel great, and everything like that. But as it currently sits, I think that's one of the biggest downsides of this camera in terms of adapting other lenses. I know with the Fuji system, they have cameras that are, I like the 50R just like looks like the most uninspired brick of a camera. But it does an amazing job of, you know, actually having a shutter in the camera, so you're able to adapt these lenses without having to worry about that sensor readout in that same way. So that is like my biggest bummer, and one of the things that has made me most question if this system is for me, other than obviously the price. This camera is, I believe, $5,750, so $5,750 just for the body itself, and then most of the lenses are in the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 plus range. So it's definitely not a system that makes it really, really easy to get into. But that being said, you're not going to be buying a Hasselblad digital medium format system to be saving money. You're going to be buying it because it does something that your other cameras don't do. You're going to be buying it because it either gives you like that insane depth of field with adapting other lenses, or you're going to be getting it because the resolution that you're getting out of these Hasselblad lenses are just unreal. Like my Leicas and my Leica glass and my Zeiss glass are amazing. They provide me with amazing detail, amazing rendering. I couldn't be happier with that system. But shooting it side by side with these lenses on a 50 megapixel camera, there is a big difference in dynamic range, in overall sharpness, in overall depth of the image. Even though, you know, the depth of field when using these isn't nearly what it is, I think, you know, a 3.2 lens on this medium format system maybe is equivalent to like a 2.5 or something. So you're not getting like that same shallow 1.4 aperture, but what you're getting is like the depth of color, the depth of dynamic range, the file itself. Like the files are like 100 megabytes per. They're huge, and it's just a different setup. It's not going to be something that's going to be your normal run and gun thing. The Leicas or another autofocus system is going to work a lot better for that. But for something that is going to allow you to be amazing for landscapes, for portraits, as long as people aren't moving, that kind of thing, that's where this camera really shines. And so it's definitely, for me, kind of like would be an auxiliary piece. It'd be a building block of something else. But now that I have used one, it's going to be really hard to not have it in the back of my mind as something that I'm really going to want to invest in. So anyway, I want to say a huge thank you to Hasselblad for sending this over. This kit has been honestly a huge joy to use. It's something that I am definitely trying to find a way to get myself into as well. But as some of you may know, I just bought two Leica M10s. So it might be backburnered for a while until maybe a new version comes out or something that brings the price down into a place that's more manageable for me. I think one of the things that people are gonna ask as well is it worth the price? I would say if it's something that gets you out and gets you inspired to use, and you're thinking about it as probably an addition to another system that you already have, unless maybe you're a landscape photographer. Yeah, I mean, like, pairing this with my Leicas is an amazing pairing. It works really, really well, but I'm not expecting it to do something that I don't think it was made to do. Maybe like real estate or landscape or some stuff like that. Even travel, like this would work really, really well for as a single camera. But for a wedding photographer, it's definitely something that would be an additional camera. It would be something that is an auxiliary piece. It wouldn't be my main thing, but it's something that I would bring out for kind of like more specialized things, for things that I really want just that extra depth, that extra special feel to. So is it worth it? That's up to you. I don't think that I could justify paying the price that it would be to get this whole kit right now. But it's definitely something that I feel like would set my work apart a little bit more, would provide a higher client experience. For some people that might be into that, it's just like shooting film too. Like some clients are gonna love that I shoot some film at weddings, some aren't gonna care. Same thing with this. Some clients are gonna love that they got a medium format Hasselblad, 50 megapixel with incredible depth file out of this, and some people aren't gonna care at all. So will it make me more money? Who knows? But if you're looking for something that's gonna be unique, to set yourself apart, to have something that is, just different than the normal crowd that's shooting Sony and Canon, this definitely might be something to look into. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions about this setup. I have a few more videos that I'm gonna be filming about this. I walked around and did some street work with it just to kind of test out the camera before the first wedding I had. And then I'm planning on also doing a review of just kind of like adapting lenses onto it, what works, what doesn't. So a few more videos coming with this system and the XC whatever Hasselblad system in the future. But overall, if you have any questions, let me know. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. I have lots of videos coming up, especially now that like the kind of wedding season is dying down. Lots more gear reviews, lots more just camera stuff. So hit that up. And if you're interested in how I use gear and some more technique kind of stuff, I have a Patreon channel that I post a few videos a month to. The link to that will be in the description below. And if you liked the overall processing and how the images looked for this, I have my own preset pack. I know every photographer does, it feels like these days. But they're actually really, really well done. I know I did a ton of research and spent months and months developing them. And lots of wedding photographers, hundreds if not thousands, actually use them. So they're available down below as well. So thanks again, and I will see you guys in the next one.